Hey everyone, John, your humble host here. I must give a content warning right up front for this particular episode. There's nothing that I had to bleep. It's not about language, but it's really about the content and the discussion. My guest, Rahim, was an inmate in a maximum security prison. He talks quite candidly about his childhood, which was pretty rough, and some of the things that he witnessed. And he talks about the crime for which he was convicted and prison life and several other quite sensitive subjects. The content in this episode may not be right for everyone, and that's okay. If you'd like more information, feel free to visit my very detailed show notes, which are posted on my website at trekprofiles.com. Depending on how you are listening to this, you might be able to visit the website directly from the show description. But either way, if you have concerns about sensitive topics, please review the information and then make the decision that's right for you. Okay, on with the show. Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 69, recorded September 2022. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we talk with a Star Trek fan about why this show matters to them. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 69. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com for email or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. And here's our spoiler warning. As we recorded this, we were in the early part of Lower Decks Season 3, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, humans. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the officially efficacious, ambivalently ambiguous, and occasionally obtuse M5 Multitronic unit.
The M5 is ready.
M5, let's do the announcements.
Announcements file displayed.
This is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way you can do that is to follow us wherever you're getting your audio. We're on all the major platforms, and your following us helps other Trek fans find us. Another way that you can show your support is to make a donation in any amount to our official charity here at the show, and that's the Children's Fund for Glycogen Storage Disease. I talked more about this in episode 34 of the show, so if you're able, and if you'd like, please head over to trekprofiles.com/donate, and you'll see the link there that goes directly to the charity. I'll put a link in my show notes too. Thank you so much. There's a little bit of lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them, or not, as you choose. At the end of every episode, my guest faces the Kobayashi Maru lightning round, which consists of 5 terrible multiple-choice Star Trek questions. After each episode drops, I tweet those out as polls, and we compare my guest's answers to the poll results on each episode. So here are the results from episode 66 with Steve Gibson. Question 1. Choose your TOS shuttlecraft, the Columbus, the Einstein, the Galileo, or the Copernicus. Both Steve and the Twitter people picked the Galileo, and the poll was 56% for the Galileo, the Columbus, and Einstein both at 11, with the Copernicus at 22. Question 2. Which planet should we revisit, Gamma Trianguli 6 or Sigma Draconis 6? My guest and the poll respondents agreed that the Morgs and iMorgs should be revisited on Sigma Draconis 6. In this case, the poll was 67 to 33%. Question 3. Which of these spots on the Enterprise would be your favorite? The Shuttle Bay Observation Platform, the Officers' Lounge, the Arboretum, or the Rec Room? Steve picked the Officers' Lounge, but on Twitter, the Shuttle Bay Observation Platform was the winner with an astonishing 53%. The Arboretum came in at 27, and the Officers' Lounge at 13, and the Rec Room at 7. Question 4. Choose your off-brand TNG engineer, MacDougall, Argyle, Logan, or Leland T. Lynch. Steve picked MacDougall, but Argyle came out on top on Twitter by 52%. MacDougall and Leland T. Lynch tied at 19, with Logan at 10. And finally, question 5. Which of these aliens are the worst? The Vidians, the Charon, or the Kobali? Steve said the Kobali were the worst, but the Vidians were the pick of the people online by a puissant 86%. The Kobali and the Charon were tied at 7 apiece. Now, if you enjoyed those questions and would like to take a stab at writing your own for possible inclusion in the show, send them to me at feedback@trekprofiles.com or DM me on Twitter. And in fact, some portions of the lightning round questions in this very episode were written by listener Adam Saunders. So if you'd like to take a shot, send me your ideas, and I thank Adam for his contributions to the show. All right, that's going to do it for announcements. M5, hit it.
Commencing transmission.
His favorite character is that most Klingon of the Klingons, Worf. He loves that TNG Enterprise D. He's from Nashville, Tennessee, North America, Earth, and Sector 001. It's Rahim Buford. Welcome, Rahim, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Hello, how are you? Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and I'm happy to share.
All right, fantastic. Well, the M5 demands that I ask question one, Rahim, which is, are you a Star Trek fan?
Absolutely.
And I see you're wearing there you go, you got your Vulcan salute. I see you wearing a Star Trek shirt today. Absolutely. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
So what is the earliest memory you have of Star Trek in your life?
I was a child, probably early 80s, maybe.
Okay.
And as you saw the sign that I just showed, Spock stuck out early on in the early series of Star Trek. And as a child, we just used to watch it whenever we could.
All right. And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, 2 different time frames. Early life, I was in South Nashville, Providence, which I spent a lot of time with my grandmother and deep connection there. And by the time I was 6, we migrated to Northeast Nashville to Parkwood Estates. And that is where I actually saw my first Star Trek episode. In Parkwood Estates.
Do you remember which episode it was? It's okay if you don't, but it's always fun. I always like to ask.
Yeah, no, I don't.
All right, so it was the original series is what you first saw.
Yes.
And now, if it was the 80s, perhaps Next Generation was on. Did you watch any Next Generation at that time?
Well, it was the early 80s. So I didn't get to the Next Generation until the unfortunate circumstances that occurred in my life, because as we have a conversation, you will see that there was a separation from myself and the things that I liked as a child, just because of the way that I grew up.
All right, so let's talk about that. Now, I will say that I met you in person at the Star Trek convention that we just had here in Las Vegas, and you gave a panel, which I thought was fascinating, and I found it a really touching story. We'll get into all that here in a minute, but it's something that I think is best handled chronologically, I think. So let's leave Star Trek for a minute and let's just talk about you growing up, and then I want to get to the point of you being on the stage at the Star Trek convention. So that's going to be the end of the story for right now. That's where we'll pause the story. So you're growing up in Parkwood Estates in Nashville. What age were you at this time?
My first birthday that I remember, I was 6 years old. I remember the 6 on the birthday cake, a white cake. These little lines, red lines around it. I received a racetrack. So I do remember. And for the most part, my first 2 years in Parkwood, which was in 77, I believe, 77 to 78, 79, were great. My mother had married, and I later would learn just from experience and maturing that she married a man that she didn't really love. She wasn't really in love with. And I think she did it to give her children a father figure, because by the time we moved to Parkwood, there were 5 of us. And my mother would later birth 2 more children. It would be 7. And so just growing up, it was normal early on, but then things changed when the guy my mom married showed a different side of himself. And it created a bit of fear in the household and unrest. And over time, my brothers and I, we would just rebel against this individual because we knew he wasn't our biological father. And what would happen is that in a certain amount of time, I found myself being arrested as a juvenile, just having, wayward things that I was doing and just rebelliousness. And then over time, growing up in this neighborhood, there was a lot of fights. My brothers, a lot of inaction. I'm following these guys and they're leading me astray. And I'm not absolving myself of responsibilities for choices that I made as a young person. It's just that I understand why I made those choices. And in time, by the time I'm 16, I'm in juvenile detention. And so that was in and of itself an interesting experience because it forced me to divorce myself from my the mindset that I had as a child. I had to become something different. I had to by the state's version, I became an inmate. Then I went into this thing called survival mode, and that was 87, turning 88, and I just became a different person like in less than a year, just having that experience. Now, this is after I'd already encountered Star Trek, the original series.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time I'm in juvenile, and I went to juvenile for auto theft that I didn't even commit, but my friend did, but I was riding with him, so hey, I caught the charge.
Yeah.
But the most profound thing that is relevant to this story, I think, and how I ended up where I was on the stage where I met you, is that while I was there in Parkwood, not in Parkwood, but in juvenile, my grandmother died. When my grandmother died, it was the first time in my life that someone that I felt pain and no one had hit me.
Yeah.
And it was those early humble beginnings with my grandmother that I was just like racing in my mind and my thoughts and things like that. And I remember a story my mom had told me about myself when I was like 4, I think maybe 5. She had awakened abruptly from her sleep, and she knew that something was wrong with me. She said she searched the house. This was actually an apartment, Elm Hill Pike, Edmondson Manor on Edmondson Pike. She found me on the porch looking up into the stars, and I didn't really know what that was really all about. But ultimately, I would come to understand that I had this greater appreciation for things beyond the norm.
Okay.
And so when my grandmother died, it just made me contemplate the things of my childhood that were very dear and near to me, because I was closer to her emotionally than my own mom, just because my mom worked and my grandmother was taking care of us early on.
Right.
And so that moment and that trauma that combined while I was out on a path to view my grandmother's body, to participate in the funeral, my stepbrother and I ended up committing.
I just want to understand. So you were in juvenile, your grandmother passes away, and they give you a pass to go to the funeral, and then you have to go back to juvenile.
Yes.
Okay.
So
I just wanted to understand what was happening.
And so while we were out on that path, my stepbrother and I committed a robbery. And that robbery would be the beginning of what would ultimately, in less than a year after I left juvenile, and I left juvenile in 1988, July.
Mm-hmm.
By May the following year, I'm charged with felony murder. And in less than a year, in 1989, is which I was arrested in May. In less than a year, the following year, 1990, like March and April, I have a life and 20-year sentence. I'm on my way to prison for felony murder. And what happened is, during the course of a robbery, I shot a gun into the floor and the bullet ricocheted and it hit someone. And in 72 hours, he died.
I want to ask you if you're willing to say the name of the person that died.
I am willing to say that, and I want to thank you for even just, because sometimes we don't say things because we don't want people to. But it was Mr. Barry J. Latham. It is about redemption to me, restorative, transformative justice. It's about an evolution of a society to think about, is harm for harm correct? I don't think it is. But at the same time, people want it to be known that their pain means something and that their loss means something. And right now, we just haven't figured out how to administer justice in a way that people feel like their rights and their humanity and their love for, is respected. And that's why it's going to take a whole community. But yeah, it's cool. It's cool to say it because I feel it. And that's something I believe in, I believe in redemption. I believe in forgiveness. And I pled guilty to that offense. And a lot of factors were involved in it. My family, my mom, taking responsibility, understanding that there are things that I did that I should not have done. And I owned it. And next thing that happened when I'm in prison, I'm trying to find an identity and figure out who I am. who I was. And so the name Rahim was not my name at that time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you'll see how it all happened. I was birthed Arthel, but my name would change to Rodney because of my dad, Rahim Buford. And while I was in prison, I'm just trying to find myself and become a better me. And I encountered these individuals. There was one individual had this kind of thing on his head, and it seemed like he was glowing and shining. And I would walk up to this individual and just ask him what was on his head. Mm-hmm. One thing led to another. He said I was a Muslim, and I wanted to know everything I could about it. And I eventually began to practice Islam. But over time, I would just fade away and just go back into that identity search and trying to find my way. But what gave me some stability, at least mentally, was when I started watching the Star Trek episodes. This was the new generation. Mm-hmm. And I am seeing characters, and as I have shared, that Worf became the person or the character that I identified the most. I would begin to see these lessons, and I would notice how, like, I would long for the night so that lockdown would come and I would go in and watch the Star Trek episodes. And it seems like each episode gave me a way to think about being alive, that if I were in the state of mind of the people around me, I would have thought of myself as an inmate. I would have thought of myself as this prisoner or this bad person, this criminal. But something about those episodes allowed for me to imagine myself as being something different. And one of the things that happened early, I told myself that I wasn't in prison, that I was in school and I'm learning something. And I just made that kind of like a thing for myself.
From Star Trek.
And it was through those episodes that I was able to, I think, they stimulated my imagination. Mm-hmm. So I was able to think deeper about my circumstances and use Star Trek episodes as a way to understand what had happened in my life, what was happening in my life. And this went on for more than a decade.
Let's actually talk about the timeline. So you had indicated that you were on that juvie pass in 88, 89, somewhere around there.
88.
That's where. Okay. And so when did you begin your incarceration for the felony murder? When was that?
1989, May the 5th.
Okay, so May 89. So how long were you in prison, do you think, before you started watching these Star Trek episodes?
Well,
just a guess.
Not
whatever
long,
you think is
not long, because I think they was syndicated, and so that you could watch them on, like, I think it was 17 at the time, and so it's like they came on every day almost for a long time. I felt like I had watched all the episodes several times, and they continued all the way on into the 2000s, which made it more even profound in my life, because I was able to embrace something that helped awaken my imagination.
Just so I understand the mechanics of all this. So you'd have your normal day in the prison, right? Maybe doing a job around the prison or whatever it is they have you doing. And then at night you'd go back to your cell and you could watch TV and you could watch Star Trek. Do I have that right?
In a nutshell, yes. In a nutshell, that would happen. So,
and it's whatever the TV station was showing is what you had, right? So it was an episode that was picked for you. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
All right. And that was, so you were watching TNG, I guess, and I guess were any of the other Star Treks on while you were incarcerated?
I think some of the older classic Star Treks were coming on somewhere, because I'm here in Tennessee, again, I only watch free TV. So these were coming on. Like, I remember seeing some of them on Fox, if I'm not mistaken, on Channel 17. Okay.
So you're just watching whatever you could watch on the TV, right, at night?
Yeah.
And taking in all the episodes. And what episodes kind of jumped out at you? We'll talk more in depth about them later, but when did you really start to think, man, this is something that I'm really interested in? This is not the show that I thought it was.
Wow. I know that it was early in my watching, because what would happen for me at lockdown, and these episodes would come on like around 9:00. It was more like an adventure for me. I was able to escape the reality of knowing that I was a prisoner. And I remember just the early episodes, and I'm speaking of the new generation at this point, where a lot of exploration was happening. And as I shared with you, at least 4 different episodes that affected me the most, but some of them, were over time. But there was that episode on justice, and I'm sure you can understand why that connection would happen, because it's widely believed within the Tennessee, well, just the Department of Corrections in the United States of America, that the criminal justice system is a criminal injustice system. And it's not because people who are imprisoned and punished for choices that they may have made or may not have made. It's just that even for those who are harmed, there doesn't seem to be justice for them. And that was this particular episode with the New Generation, where it was titled Justice. And at the very end, you got to see an appeal that I had never heard something like that before, because most of the people in the United States of America, particularly in the States, if they plead guilty, you never have a trial. And so you're just really just admitting to something, but you're not able to explain what happened. And so when you see this episode where young Wesley had committed this act that was considered worthy of the death penalty, I mean, this made me think wow, how many people do things in life that are considered criminal, but because the law says being ignorant of the law is no excuse to commit a crime, therefore you must be held fully responsible. And so that particular episode stood out because the appeal that the Captain Luke Picard had given was challenging whether or not it's even correct to hold somebody responsible for something that they don't know, and that to evolve as a species, as a culture, as a people, you have to be willing to change your laws to reflect a certain level. I'm not going to say of humanity, but that was how it came to me, like a certain level of humanity where even those who had committed wrong, they could even experience some form of justice. And so that episode was heavy. The appeal at the end.
Yeah, for sure. It's and of course this is if I have it right, season 1, episode 8 or thereabouts. So it was very early on in Next Generation, very very early on, and it's the one where I think Wesley steps on the flowers.
He did.
Yeah, and so that's it, because in that society they only have the one particular punishment for all crimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But the irony in that particular episode to me was that here it is, you have this death penalty right here for doing something at a specific time in a specific place, because it could change. The episode showed you that it depending on what time it was, how something might not be, a crime if it doesn't happen within a certain time frame. But these were happy people. They were affectionate people, and it just didn't seem like they would have a death penalty just by the way they live their lives.
It's rather shocking when you sort of forget, if you know what the episode's about, you kind of forget it and go back in time and watch the episode with fresh eyes. You're like, wait a minute, what now?
Right. Exactly. But at the end, it really made me think different about even my own situation, because over time you grow to learn what it means, at least how society has defined your humanity, who you are, what's going on. Knowledge becomes a commodity, becomes a currency in prison, because the more you know, the greater your chances of survival, the greater potential to even have a choice in matters where the choices you make could hinder or help your freedom. Knowledge was a very important thing. And so to be able to be in a situation where episodes like this could stimulate my thinking, I can begin to think different about myself as a human being and look at the facts around my life that were mitigating, not to make excuses. I'm 18 years old. I would later learn that your brain, your frontal lobe, doesn't stop developing until you're 25.
That's right.
And that if you grow up with trauma, the likelihood of having more difficulty in your cognitive development and your conscious decision making, you those kind of people like myself and my brothers, we would be subject to a lot of things that would probably land in a bad place for us. So I was able to understand just by listening to information that was not just words, but I could see a story unfold. And so I saw narrative, and all of that made me come alive.
That's wonderful. I have to ask, did any of the other inmates have any opinions on your watching Star Trek?
Well, so I kind of kept my fascination a secret because like I assumed that nerdy like kind of people were into like that kind of stuff, and people are very judgmental because you have everybody in prison who is there for some reason, and you just want to try to protect yourself and not put out too much information because the fact that I like Star Trek could have been perceived as I was weak.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to keep that. You got to keep that close to the vest.
Oh, definitely.
Understood. So how long were you incarcerated?
So I was caged for 26 years of my life. From the time
and you were watching Star Trek almost that whole time.
Yeah, pretty much the whole time, except for I'd say the last 6 years, the station that I was watching on at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution, it stopped coming on, but it was replaced with Deep Space Nine. So I was still able to continue my journey with the Star Trek theme of, boldly going where no one has gone before, space being a new final frontier, and also I just got introduced to different series.
Tell me how you end up getting in. So you're in prison, and then you end up on the stage at the Roddenberry Theater at the Star Trek convention. So fill in the back half of the story for me, Rahim. You're laughing, but I think it's a wonderful story. So
yeah.
So walk me from the cell to the stage. How did that happen?
Yeah. So how that happens is that, first of all, I believe in the law of attraction. I believe that something is dear to your heart, as Star Trek had become for me. Maybe by fate, destiny, some things like that happened. But what ultimately would happen after I was released in 2015, I began to pursue a career, a lifestyle that involved social justice.
Mm-hmm.
I would become a member of the Children's Defense Fund Nashville organizing team, where I would learn about the cradle prison pipeline work. And in doing so, part of my part was to share a real true story narrative. And when I was in like second, third grade, I thought I was dumb because I made D's and F's. Mm-hmm. And once I was educated about the cradle prison pipeline, I understood that learning for children is not up to the child. It's up to those who administer education. If the child isn't getting it, it's something wrong with the teacher. But I didn't learn that until what was going on in prison. But when I was actually able to get out of prison and connect with my friend, Reverend Janet Wolf, I was able to work for the Children's Defense Fund. And from working for the Children's Defense Fund, I had also enrolled into college. Mm-hmm. So I had a scholarship to attend American Baptist College. And I would working, going to school. So I'm having these intellectual exercises. I'm reading. I'm taking knowledge that I had acquired while I was in prison, infusing it with the academic experience and sharpening things. And so I'm forming this voice that I discovered while I was in prison. Mm-hmm. And I'm sharing and I'm polishing and I'm learning and I'm sharing and I'm polishing and I'm learning. And I'm going across the country and I'm speaking. I would eventually, in 2017, form my own organization, which is the Unheard Voices Outreach, because I wanted to empower individuals leaving prison to live full, free, and productive lives. And I knew one way to do that was we be given fair opportunity for education, fair opportunity to live a living wage, and a fair opportunity to be free. Mm-hmm. And so one day, while I was doing my work, I connected with this person who connected us to this organization called Calling All Crows. And then so I did this piece, and I also do spoken word through my poetry, and I've written a book titled Save Your Own Life. And in that book, there's a piece called Who Am I?, which is a poem.
I think you actually performed that in Las Vegas.
I did. And so that poem inspired a different idea in my mind about freedom. And I was talking about freedom. Leaving prison is not freedom. freedom is a mindset, and that freedom aligns with justice and so many different other things. In that particular video, I submitted that to the Bold 100 last year as something that I thought was bold. And from
what is the Bold 100? Tell us what that is.
The Bold 100 was this idea. I think that Eugene Roddenberry, not Eugene Roddenberry, but the son. Well, yeah, Rod. The son, Eugene Rod. He calls himself Rod Roddenberry. Yeah. He was interviewing people. There was some kind of way they put together this idea that in order for the world to become better and greater, you have to be bold. And I think he might have been celebrating his mom as well, if I'm not mistaken. So that's his team ended up with this particular video piece. He saw it and he thought, wow, I want to get this individual an interview. And through this interview, when he found out that I actually was like someone who enjoyed Star Trek, because he didn't know that.
Oh.
And I was able to talk to him about how it changed my life in so many different ways. He thought that was worth something that should be shared. And he asked if he could find a way to get me to come out to Las Vegas. Would I go? And I said, absolutely. And it was one of the best experiences that I've had in my life since I've been out. And I've been out of prison for a little over 7 years.
Would you be willing to perform the poem?
Sure. You want to know it right now?
Yeah, if you're willing. I would love it. I think my listeners would love to hear it.
Sure. So it goes like this. Who am I? Society doesn't seem to know. Representing the unheard voices, my name is Roger Lowe. You see us in the now, our prison condition, blind to the facts of our mental afflictions, past decisions made before our 15-second mindless crime spree felony convictions, the monies, the honeys, the madness, materialistic sadness, 13 brothers, 5 sisters, seriously drastic. Who am I? Who am I? Choking in poverty, the pain runs deep, you see, and only as a courtesy. Yes, we smoke and drink Hennessy. Try being raised in a dysfunctional family. Mama's baby, daddy's maybe. We talking real life Rosemary's Baby. Who am I? Who am I? My eyes, my ears, my peers, no difference. 5, 10, 15, 30 years in prison. Environmental voices in me. Our life and death choices to be. Anger and stress forcing me. Public defender coercing me. Family and friends divorcing me. Crying shame, born with crime in my veins. Don't know my real name. Can you feel this freedom campaign? Who am I? Who am I? No fears, no tears. We cry truth. Feeling the reality of hell hurts still in our youth. So if you hear me hissing, don't judge, just listen. Mama didn't explain why my pops is missing. Chaos, my religion. Characteristics, robbing, stealing. I'm just expressing my hip-hop feelings, but still begging for a new beginning. Who am I? Who am I? Africa or England, of which do I claim motherland? America the beautiful, America the great. America, America, America. It's not too late. Who am I? I am you. Thank you very much.
That's beautiful, man. It really touched me when I was in the room, and I only wish my listeners could have seen the power with which you delivered that in person.
Yeah,
you know, it was one of the high points for me at the convention. It really was, and so one of the things you talked about in your talk, and I think this is actually something that's interesting because it relates to the episode Justice, is you talked about the different kinds of justice that exists in the world. And this is, it stressed my brain because I had to think back to when I was in school, and I took philosophy for a little while, which was probably not a good decision because I still have these thoughts in my head. And I remembered the discussion about distributive and procedural, retributive and restorative justice that you had. And I hope the terms, if I can remember it right, will be helpful. So distributive justice is making sure that everybody gets their fair share of things. So if we're on a desert island and, we have a bottle of water, right? How much water does each person get, right? Everyone gets their fair share. Procedural justice, the rules are consistent for everyone. We don't say that this person gets different rules than that person, right? So it's that. Then you have retributive justice, which is about punishment, which is what we saw in the episode. Right. There's only one punishment.
Right.
But then you talked very powerfully about restorative justice, which is about fixing the harms to individuals and groups.
Right.
So why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because that, I think, was a very powerful part of your presentation.
Well, thank you. And so I think that the title of the presentation was boldly reimagining systems of justice. And the idea behind it was for me to highlight retributive justice versus restorative transformative justice. And so the reason I always talk about transformative justice when I mention restorative justice is because certain things cannot be restored. You can't restore a life that has been taken. You can't, in my opinion, restore a woman who has been raped. There are things that you can't restore, but you can transcend or transform from, which is an inner experience, which is what happened for me while I was on the inside. Rehabilitation, quote unquote, never really happened. It can't happen because in and of itself, it's a thing that has to be in a situation where I once had the ability for something. And now I have to be rehabbed. My injury to my arm, it once functioned. Now I injured it. I work on it. It refunctions. But when you go to prison, damaged, 9 out of 10 times you're going to leave even more damaged. And so rehabilitation is not something in the idea of the ideal sense that even happens. So I talk about restorative transformative justice because the question is different. It asks you, who was harmed? How can we move towards healing for that person who was harmed? And it goes a step further. It wants to inquire about who did the harming and look into that person's life as a human being. And then it's another level where the community is involved, because there are ways in which you can address harm in this particular culture of restorative justice or restorative practices. And there are times when you would have conference circles, healing circles, forgiving circles, all types of circles where people are safe and liberated to be able to talk about their pain, their harm. And there's like this process, like a talking piece. So whoever has that, everybody's listening to them talk. Now, there are variations and ways in which you can do the same kinds of things, but just for the most part, how I was introduced to restorative transformative justice involved the rituals, and it dates all the way back to the Aborigine people of this land, and even in other lands like Australia, down below. So, yeah.
So in the episode, Justice, because we're on a Star Trek show, so I guess we should talk about the episode, I guess. So let me see if I understand it right. You tell me if I've got it. In the episode, Wesley destroys a bunch of flowers on accident. The situation is that there's only retributive justice for him, right? There's only punishment. Whereas restorative justice would be perhaps Wesley should apologize to the people in the field for destroying the flowers and then replant them and make it back to how it was, or even better, plant more flowers and restore the garden to how it was, and we'll call it a day. That would be restorative justice in that context. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I would think in some ways, but the question of asking like who was harmed in this particular case with Wesley, no human being, humanoid, or anything of that nature was harmed. What happened is, through a playful act, he ran into this flower bed, having no knowledge whatsoever that an injustice had occurred because of the time in which that happened, right? And so restorative transformative justice for me looking at that episode would have been once they explained to Wesley, this is the law, this is what happened, XYZ, XYZ. Wesley is given a free opportunity to express the fact that, you know what, I didn't even know it was an accident. But even he could go beyond that and say, but I'm willing to plant new flowers. I'm willing to do something different than what, to correct what just happened. And so it would have looked like that. And then the other side, which really there's no side because there's no flower advocate other than the human beings who were there. And so
right.
You have to question what actually happened.
Understood. Okay, great. Well, then let's talk about some of the other episodes that you wanted to talk about. Let's start with The Measure of a Man, TNG, Season 2, Episode 9. This one comes up on the show all the time. Rahim, that's probably no surprise to you. It's a very popular episode of Star Trek. But why is it special to you?
Yeah. So this particular episode caught me in different ways. Number one, I had never heard the term sentient being. And so it forced me to the dictionary. And then I had to think differently about myself because the definition said, oh, I'm a sentient being. I've never heard that before. And so that's one of the things that sparked me, that keyed me in on it. But I was very impressed with Captain Picard's litigation, his oratorical command of language and how he expressed himself, because it reminded me of being in court and how they seem to have been speaking a foreign language to me. And there was this time when I was in court where the judge just embarrassed me by just saying, like, almost he was saying, like, I don't even know what planet you live on, but what you're saying is like a pie in the sky. Is basically what was said to me. But so I enjoyed the passion that Data was represented with. And so what really just was profound for me in the episode was when Captain Picard was having like a drink with Guinan, and she gave him some wisdom about what possibly could happen if Data was not recognized as sentient or could not have the freedom to choose. Because then you could make a species of AI individuals who could maybe take over the world, or maybe you could just use them to do harm. That's how she was thinking about the particular situation. But what I think what got to me the most was when the captain reflected on it, and he was saying something like, he was saying them like, this is a disposable group of people. Disposable. And that word, I don't know if it was which one said it, but I thought about, that's us. That's us in prison. In my mind, I said every one of us is disposable, because that's why we can be put out of society and into exile, because we're disposable, and some could be here forever. And so that really just kind of made me think some kind of way about the measure of a man, because it would tell me that, like, I am only the worst thing that I had ever done. Because if my life ends with what was announced upon me as my identity, convicted felon, criminal, the measure of a man for me would have been this bad person. So it forced me to think about what is the measure of a man for me. And that kind of like was deep, because I knew I could become a better person, but I just needed to survive. I needed to survive. I needed to have some autonomy, some ways to make good choices that would allow for me to make it into the time for when I could be considered for release. And so the measure of a man, that was like, it just resonated with me.
It's a powerful story, my friend, and I'm glad you shared that. I can't imagine what it would be like to actually be incarcerated and watching this episode that has a lot of courtroom drama in it, where you're talking about such high stakes. I can only imagine the effect that it had on you, and you speak very powerfully about it. So thank you for sharing that. All right, let's talk about some Worf episodes. You mentioned that Worf is your favorite. He's your guy.
Yeah.
So but before we even jump into this, let me just ask you, it looks like we're going to get some Worf on the new Star Trek series. Are you excited about that?
I am. I'm very excited about that.
He's got a very distinguished sort of look. He's gone a little gray, but
Yep.
I imagine he's still the same Worf that he ever was. We'll find out. Any predictions you want to give us?
I don't have any predictions, but I am looking forward to the wisdom that's going to come from the premise of a discussion or the prelude, the premise, and then the epilogue. Whatever happens at the end, Worf always seems to give me something that I can chew on later.
All right, fantastic. Well, then let's jump into it. So let's talk about Birthright Part 2. That's TNG Season 6, Episode 17, a big Worf episode.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell me what in this episode is special to you?
Well, I grew up without my father. My last memories when I was a kid, like 3, 4, 5, I saw my dad do a bad thing. He hit my mom. And then I remember the most pleasant times my dad was washing us in the tub. But then by the time I'm 6, I don't even know where my dad is. I don't have any communication with my dad. So in my own way, I think I went on a search for my father. And as you may know about Birthright Part 1, that was this journey. And Worf went on this journey in search of his father. Even though to find his father in some ways might have been a dishonorable thing, because of Klingons, they die on their sword, on their shield. They don't live in a battle, and so he went on this journey looking for his father. So number one, that made me connect. Number two, what he found probably was shocking to him, but it was even shocking to them to see one of their own, not even from the same place as where they were, because all they knew was this planet. So I felt like when I went to prison, there was this new world and this thing that happened. And just like what happened as Worf was able to demonstrate Klingon culture to these young Klingons over time, they would see a different way to exist and be in the world. This happened for me when I started to acquire knowledge, when I no longer accepted that I was just a quote unquote the N-word. And as I began to read, I began to find out things about myself, that I wasn't just a descendant of a slave or people who had been enslaved. African, or who were called African people, actually were kings. Some of them were warriors. I learned about Shaka Zulu. I learned about Hannibal, who had this army of elephants and was like one of the best warriors in all time. I learned about Timbuktu, which was a city in what is called Egypt, but Egypt was called Kemet, and that was a city of Waset, where they had the largest library in the world. So I began to see myself through time in a different light. And so as Wolf was able to teach these young people various things about the culture, I saw myself learning as the old heads would see me reading. And every now and old heads are older guys in prison. They sit down and they see potential in a young person. And so I got a lot of attention from the old heads because for whatever reasons, they saw something in me that I didn't necessarily see in myself, but whatever it was reinforced by their attention and the schooling that I was being given, how to survive prison, but how to believe in myself when I get out, because no one ever made me think that I would die in prison, what I needed to do to stay out. So I was able to identify with that part of that episode as well. Just the idea that when Worf found out these elders who were Klingon had compromised, it made me look back in time at the civil rights movement. And that's why I'm trying to say that it's so much to Star Trek. If we really wanted people to see how deep it is, it takes what I'm about to do just now, because this is how deep this thing goes in different episodes. But so I'm thinking about the civil rights movement and how after King was killed, all of those who were following him, you notice that the civil rights movement would eventually die. And so I looked at myself growing up and I'm like, I didn't have like a leader somebody to make me feel like a warrior, somebody like a wolf that will make me come alive on the inside, where I could even smell broadly in ways that, or think deeper in ways that only knowing my true history could give to me. And so the episode brought that home for me in that way. And even more as I began to grow and realize that I was a human being, and I'm in prison now at this point, that I still had a life, because I saw that little prison of that space where those younger Cleons and the older Cleons were living with a Romulan. I mean, who that is unheard of. And so,
Right.
yeah, I was just able to connect my own life to these episodes. And that's what made each and every episode like sacred for me, because it gave me more than just entertainment. It gave me a way to think about my own life and a way to empower myself from that knowledge of what I saw. And as you would later learn, they would be liberated from the planet, though they would be given that choice. And so wrapped up in the idea of a choice, there's this word freedom. That's what makes freedom, is that you have a choice. But when you no longer have a choice, you don't have freedom. And in many respects, I didn't have choices even growing up, because the limitations of my knowledge, which the ignorance were the boundaries of my intellect, in the sense that I didn't know. I couldn't even form an imagined reality beyond where I was living, because I'm operating in a record. The record of my mind is what I see around me. And so that poem that I spoke, I shared, Who Am I? That actually is my real life. Every single line, every single word, I can tell you what it means and why I said it, all the way to the end when I even asked the question, Africa or England, or which do I claim motherland? Because on my mom's side, my ancestors are European. So it's deep like that. But this, getting back to the episode and how I was able to just see differently and to think that, like, even freedom is going to be mine, because they left a planet. You can imagine, I was just trying to leave a prison. And so that was a deep episode. And even all the way down to the end, when, the captain asked him, did you find your father? He knew that his response wasn't genuine when Worf said something that whatever, but it he lied.
Yeah.
And so, that was heavy. And like I said, I identified with the Worf part of that, but Data had his thing, but I followed this part because it felt like me. It still does. I mean, it's my most watched episode. Yeah.
Oh, really? So this is your all-time favorite?
Yeah. I watch reruns. Yeah. I mean, because it's so rich.
Yeah.
When you understand how the absence of a father in a child's life can influence his or her destiny, and that how when there's no honor, because even with the name that I had, I didn't even have the father. And so when you think about, Cleon culture is, War Son of Morg. I mean, it's like this continuation. You don't get to be an individual.
Yeah. And
so when you go to prison, everybody's the same. But the only distinction that you have is supposed to be your name. But then when you go to prison, you realize that even your name isn't yours, because your name is replaced with a number. So this connection with Star Trek is deep. It's deep.
I think you touch on something that I think is very fundamental inside of all Star Trek. I mean, even going back to the original series from the 60s, in that learning about the world is one of the most important things that you could do. And that's part of the human experience and the human adventure, right? And that's infused into every element of Star Trek right from the beginning. I mean, what's the purpose of the 5-year mission, right? To go out and see what's out there and to learn about it.
Absolutely.
It's a lesson I teach my kid. I tell him, why is education important? And he's known this answer since he was 3. He knows the answer he's supposed to give, which is to learn about the world so I can make the best choices about how to live in it.
Absolutely.
Right. Why is education important? Right. It's not because it's not getting into college.
Right.
It's not getting good. It's not getting good grades, getting on the honor roll. It's about learning about the world so that you can make the best choices about how to live. And that to me is something that I think is very powerful in Star Trek that touches me as well. So
absolutely.
I was glad you brought it up. So that's one bookend of sort of the Worf experience. Let's talk about the other bookend. Let's talk about redemption, parts 1 and 2. That's Next Generation, season 4, episode 26, and season 5, episode 1, if I have it right. And of course, this is the one where we have a lot of Galron and a lot of the Duras and all of that going on. So please tell me, Rahim, in this particular episode, what's special to you?
Yeah. So just first of all, the term, which our last conversation we have about an episode, that same term, redemption, is going to be a part of that as well. But the thing about a person like being in prison, at least for me, there is this once you have a social death, and that's what happens when you go to prison, you die to society. And this is in the legal sense as well, because once you become convicted of a felony, at least in the state of Tennessee, you lose some of your civil rights and some of your constitutional rights. And right now, this coming November, we in Tennessee get a chance to finally end slavery, because slavery is still on the books in Tennessee, and it's still on the books in the United States Constitution as well, the 13th Amendment. But we're about to move away from that, I believe, in my state. And so being in that condition and dying a social death, not having a name, only redemption could bring you to life again. You have to be redeemed, but to be made new again. How can this happen for you? Religiously, Christians do it through, the baptism, but how does it happen socially, civilly, if you're in prison? It's to be given parole. And that gave that idea that I need to get my family name in place and in check. And so the interesting thing, and I'm not embarrassed to say it because it's just the truth, that a lot of education of my family happened in prison, because 3 of my biological brothers were my cellmate. And my oldest brother, that's where my dad spent his time, with that side, with his mother and his brothers. And so I learned about my father from my brother in prison, who I didn't even know. We met in 93, right? And so that's one part. It's one part of how I learned. And then
just a point of clarification. So you get sent to prison, mm-hmm. and you get put in the same unit where your brothers were living, and you were assigned to the same cells.
Kind of, sort of like that, but I'll make it real quick. So I'm already in prison. My older brother, when I was 10 years old, my mom had called me out into the front yard, and she said, "I got something to tell you. One of your brothers is going to prison." And I said, "Who? Robert, Kevin?" These are the brothers that I actually grew up with, that my mother birthed. She said, "No, you got some other brothers." Yeah. And I just knew that name. And that was in like 1978. But he had paroled in 89. But then he ended up getting in some trouble. So in 93, I'm in prison. He comes to the place where I was. And
I see. Okay.
Yeah, and then we became cellmates like that. And then one of the other brothers would come. And so these are various stories that come with my real life, to whereas I'm at a prison for the first time, meeting 2 of my brothers I never really met before. And I'm learning about my father, but I'm also learning about my brothers that I didn't even know I had. And so when we're talking about redemption, when you look at what was happening with Worth and his younger brother, and how these secrets that who I am, I can't tell you, because I'm in danger. And so there was times when I'm even afraid, because I was a Buford, and that they did bad things. And I even learned about my daddy from other people in prison who knew my father, who were my father's age. And so I'm trying to say that, like, this thing about redemption, and I'm having this name, it's like, how does that, and how do I? Because if I don't have a name, who am I? You see? And so this particular episode was that process by which both episodes, the name was restored, the pride was given back, the fight for what is my right, all of that was given back, and so that was a deep episode. Those 2.
Let's talk about a different episode. Let's talk about Lower Decks. Let's talk
Yeah.
about TNG Season 7, Episode 18. This is a very popular episode, comes up on Trek Profiles quite a bit. Of course, we have all the lower deckers on the Enterprise angling for a promotion, and sort of we get the story told from the perspective of people who are not the command staff for the first time. So what is particularly noteworthy about this episode for you, Rahim?
Well, first of all, it's number 2.
Oh, okay.
Of my most desired, and what's most popular about it, why it resonates with me is when at the end, and I have to work it back because there's different parts of it, but at the end that term came back around when the captain was speaking to the ensign, and he revealed to her that he had requested her.
Cedo Jaxa, yeah.
And that he felt like he wanted to give her a proper chance at redemption. So that brought all the rest of the episode before that all into a head for me, because now I could understand why when Worf was when he had made this thing up about training, and he kept knocking her off her feet, and at some point she just stopped, and she said, "No, it's unfair." And he said he only wished it wouldn't have taken her so long to defend herself. And so I thought about, like, wow, I really hadn't been fighting like I should. Even though I know I had done wrong, but like, do I have to accept what was given to me? And what was given to me was a life in 20-year sentence. And I would take from that episode, and I would eventually start doing more litigating in court and just trying to get my voice out there to defend myself. And so this gave me, a chance, not a chance, but inspiration to fight more for myself, and to believe that I was worthy of this. Somebody else could believe in me other than myself, because it was the captain who wanted to give her the opportunity to, and it was Ensign Jackson, right?
Cedo Jaxa.
Jackson, okay, Cedo Jackson. Yeah, to give her a chance to redeem herself, because she had made a bad choice, and in her making a bad choice with some other people, some people had been murdered. Some people lost their lives, and some people felt like she didn't deserve to even be on the Enterprise in and of itself, probably. And so when you look at how you try so hard to impress in the people who are older than you, and sometimes you do it to a fault. I mean, this is so much. Every part of the episode is something that you can glean wisdom from my life. I can tell you something that relates to every part of that particular episode that is my life. But at the end, and she was given that opportunity, she didn't make it. And I did make it. And I've been out for almost 7 years. And not only have I just been out for 7 years, but I've been able to get out of the country twice. Some people that I know have never even been out of the state that they live in. And I've had some successes. And so I just feel like I've been given this chance at redemption, a real redemption. Like, I'm here and I did a terrible thing, and I feel bad about that, and I really will always regret what I had done. But I'm doing better than before I made bad choices. I'm becoming that person that I really want to be. And I'm proud of myself for not giving up, and for standing in the gap for people who are just like me, who are still in prison here in the state of Tennessee, who don't have a voice. And so representing the unheard voices, I do that with pride. And that particular episode, Lower Decks, is laced with so much inspiration. This is why I can go back and watch episodes and get some energy to live the life that I'm living, because I don't see the type of art that I need often that moves me. And when I can get into an adventure, which is what I look at the Star Trek episodes, it takes me, it teleports me mentally to my own imagination in a way that, so when I'm sitting there watching, every so often I'm just getting new ideas. And then the next thing you know, the next day I'm probably doing something different. So I love Star Trek. I mean, it's a game changer for me.
Rahim, why does Star Trek matter to you?
Whew. Star Trek gives us a chance to learn about the type of universe we can live in. It educates us to the world in which we actually living in. It's the kind of art that, as you journey through a series, it's as though you experience it. You experience this for yourself. Star Trek matters because we need to be able to speak harsh truths. We need to be able to see the worst of who we are. We need to be able to see the best of who we are. And if it takes art and through reappropriation, understanding, into how do you see yourself in something, Star Trek matters because to me, it's an unbiased approach. And it's a way to recognize that in a society, in a world that we live in, that we are different. Everybody, Europeans and Africans and Asians and Japanese and Black Americans, white Americans, we're not all the same. And so Star Trek matters to say that even though we're not all the same, we can celebrate those differences. We can celebrate not being the same, and then we can also come together for a common cause. We can explore, we can respect, and we can live in peace with one another. So Star Trek matters in so many ways. It's not just science fiction and entertainment for me. As you know, it's guidance. And so if we really want to give ourselves a different chance at teaching, if we want a different pedagogy, I think Star Trek matters for that reason. It's like how many generations can we put in the same room and let's watch one of these episodes that I picked out and let's have a discussion about this in our real lives and what, so Star Trek means a chance, an opportunity to not only change the narrative, but to move toward that vision of its creator, that utopian vision. And that utopian vision is not prevalent today when you look at what type of content is being provided to us. I don't see the inspiration to change the world, to live in a world where we all can be at peace. I don't really just see that, but I see that in Star Trek. So it matters.
Well, this has been quite a conversation we've had, Rahim. We've talked about quite a number of things, and you've spoken very powerfully about your experience with Star Trek, but we're going to have to pivot because my show usually ends on a lighter note, a little bit more of a fun little adventure here. So the M5 is telling me that it's now time for the Kobayashi Maru lightning round.
Okay.
So the Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5 just for you, my friend.
All right.
Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little program.
All right.
Are you ready, Rahim?
I'm ready.
All right. M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Rahim's responses.
The simulation is prepared.
It's movie night. Do you prefer a night at the opera with the NX-01 crew on the Enterprise or Sherlock Jr. with the crew of the Discovery?
Sherlock Jr. with the crew of the Discovery.
Who looks best as another species? Kirk as a Romulan, Saru as a human, or Culber as a Bajoran?
Saru as a human.
It's time to build a shuttle and take it for a test flight. Are you going with Sam Rutherford and the Sequoia or Tom Paris on the Delta Flyer?
Tom Paris.
Who is your orbital dive partner? Kelvin Kirk, Torres, or Mariner?
Mariner.
And finally, who's chasing you? A giant Borg snake? Klingon clowns with bat'leths for arms? Or Kukul Khan?
Kukul Khan.
All right. Simulation complete. M5. Compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing.
Rahim, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has determined that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our show. And 5, what title shall we award our guest?
Rahim is awarded the title of Federation Representative to the Khitomer Conference.
All right. Thank you very much.
So, Rahim, why don't you tell people how they can get in touch with you, where they can follow you, and tell us a little bit about your organization, Unheard Voices Outreach.
Okay, so people can get in touch with me through just unheardvoicesoutreach.org. That's the organization. And I'm on pretty much all social media that I think is still relevant. On Instagram, Twitter, I'm on Facebook. And that's at Rahim Buford. Rahim Buford, that's my handle. And my organization, the Unheard Voices Outreach, was founded as a vision to empower people who, after they were punished, they could come out and find a way to live in society without being hindered by this terrible thing called felonyism. And felonyism is just the legal, political, social, and even sometimes oppressive, suppressive discrimination for people who've been convicted of felonies. And so what my work does is to help those who are caught up in the criminal legal system. If they're in prison, if they're going to make parole, I do sessions with them and their families to help them understand what the expectations I would have of them, what I would learn about the expectations they have of each other, and I would help them to organize to advocate for their loved ones' freedom. I'm also involved in helping to change laws in the state of Tennessee, where I paroled a life sentence. Today, if I was given that same sentence, I would die in prison, because life sentence is now a 51-year sentence. It's almost unparoled. It's unparolable, pretty much. And so I advocate for change in that way. I'm also a social justice advocate, where I organize to help to create power for the formerly incarcerated community, because over 430-some thousand people in Tennessee cannot vote. And so I've already been punished for what I've done according to the law, but now this community cannot come out of prison and live full, free, productive lives, because we're always being reminded of the worst thing that we've ever done. And so I kind of work in a way to bring positive light and positive energy to those in society who may be afraid of the idea of a person leaving prison. And I just want to show up in the space to say, no, we're human beings. And so this is another reason why Star Trek is relevant, because it really helps you to understand that there are ways that you present yourself in society. And so the Unheard Voices Outreach gives a voice to this group of people, and I've been, for the most part, one of those voices.
Rahim, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your friendly messages of feedback, your diabolic diatribes of derision, or video mashups of Vogon poetry accompanied by the Vulcan Lyre to feedback@trekprofiles.com, or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be sent straight to Grethor as a snack for Feklir. This time, I leave you with a quote from Worf, who in the episode Birthright Part 2 said, quote, "But the truth is, I am being executed because I brought something dangerous to your young people. Knowledge." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
So I think then we jump into what I call fandom exploration, which is really how did you discover Star Trek? All right. Now, if I understood, because I attended your talk, and I understand that this was when you were incarcerated. It's when you first started watching Star Trek, or was it before?
It was before, but while I was incarcerated, that is when Star Trek turned it up a notch within my own consciousness to where I really understood what Star Trek meant for me and to me.
Okay.
So that's as a child.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. Because the reason I'm asking is, we'll save it for the show, but the reason I want to go that way is because usually I can do like a biographical approach. Like, when's the first time you remember seeing any Star Trek in your life? Boom, tickety, we're done.
All right.
Was that okay for you?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. And it's now giving me another way of thinking about how to communicate with young people. Just talking with you, I flirted the idea in my mind, but now I'm going to do it for real, like for real. I'm going to figure out a way that I can show episodes that teach lessons, like some that I learned, like what we discussed today. And I want to see if I can engage young people in critical dialogue around these particular episodes. I really think this could be a game changer. So it's just something I'm going to put some words to and try to figure out a way to create a little pilot project.